All right, let's talk about something that probably crosses a lot of our minds: in flight emergencies. Now, you've probably seen the Hollywood version, right? But what really goes on in the cockpit of a small plane when things go sideways? Today, we're going to dig into the anatomy of an emergency landing, pulling our info straight from the FAA's own playbook. We're going to look at the psychology, the physics, and some of the surprising moves pilots make to walk away from a really bad day. So let's just kick things off with a big question. When something goes wrong up there, what do you think is the single most dangerous factor? Is it the engine quitting? Is it the nasty weather rolling in? Or the scary looking ground down below?
Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. It's the space between the pilot's own ears. Yep. Before a pilot can even begin to fly the airplane out of trouble, they first have to fly their own mind. That initial psychological battle in the first few seconds, that's often what decides the entire outcome.
And that brings us perfectly to our first section: fighting your own mind. This is all about those internal traps, the mental hazards that can freeze up even the most experienced pilot before they can do a single thing. The FAA actually points to three huge psychological traps. First up is just plain denial, that reluctance to admit, oh man, this is really happening. And that hesitation can burn through precious seconds. The second is panic. That fear of getting hurt can be totally overwhelming, but panicking just makes the worst case scenario more likely. And the third one, oh, this is a big one: the desire to save the airplane. Trying not to scratch the multi-thousand-dollar machine can push a pilot to make some incredibly dangerous decisions. And this quote from the FAA just says it all, doesn't it? It is crystal clear: the airplane is expendable. The people inside, not so much. A successful emergency landing is defined by one single thing: everybody walking away. The plane is just a tool to make that happen, and if it has to be sacrificed, so be it. So, once the pilots got their head in the game, the next goal is something that sounds, well, like a total contradiction. They start planning for a survivable crash. What's so fascinating here is how these planes are actually designed. The goal isn't to prevent damage, it's to manage it. Think about it. Things like the wings, the landing gear, the belly of the plane, they're basically designed to act like the crumple zones in your car. They're meant to bend, break, and tear away to absorb all that violent impact energy, all to protect the one thing that matters: the cabin. So really, it all boils down to two incredibly simple ideas. Number one, use the plane structure to keep that passenger cabin from getting crushed. And number two, make sure you are strapped in tight. Your seatbelt makes sure you slow down at the same rate as the airplane, which helps you avoid that secondary and often way more dangerous impact with the inside of the plane itself. Now, to really get why this is so critical, we have to talk a little bit of physics. The destructive energy in a crash doesn't just go up with speed, it goes up with the square of the speed. That means if you double your speed, you're not dealing with double the force, you're dealing with 4 times the destructive energy. So managing speed isn't just a good idea, it is everything. And just look at what this means in the real world. Your typical small plane is built to protect you in about a 9G deceleration. So, at 50 miles an hour, the plane needs just under 10 feet of space to crash and absorb that energy safely. But if you double your speed to 100 miles an hour, you don't need 20 feet. You need 4 times that, almost 38 feet. This right here is why a pilot's number one job in an emergency is to touch down at the absolute slowest controllable speed possible, period. Okay, this is all great in theory, but what if there's just nowhere to land? No nice flat field in sight? Well, this is where pilots are trained to completely redefine what a landing spot can be. First, though, we need to understand a really key difference. A forced landing means you have zero choice. The engine's dead, the plane is a glider, and you are coming down right now. A precautionary landing, on the other hand, is a choice. You decide to land because things are getting sketchy. Maybe the weather's turning or you're low on fuel. A huge, and I mean huge, pilot error is to let wishful thinking turn a precautionary situation into a forced one. So when that perfect runway isn't an option, pilots have this kind of unconventional landing cheat sheet. A dense field of corn, for example, isn't seen as an obstacle. It's a natural braking system. A forest? The technique is to fly in super slow, nose high, and basically stall the plane into the treetops, letting the branches absorb the impact. Ditching in the water? You land with the gear up so the wheels don't catch and flip you over. Even a road is a possibility, though you have to be incredibly careful about invisible power lines. The point is, almost any terrain can be made survivable if you know how to use it.
But what about the single most time-crunched, high-stakes emergency a pilot can face? An engine failure right after takeoff. This brings us to a famous and tragically often fatal trap known as the impossible turn.
I want you to just imagine this. You've just taken off. You're maybe a few hundred feet up, and suddenly, silence. The engine is dead. But that long, beautiful, safe runway is right there, just behind you. The urge, the instinct to just turn around and land on it is overwhelming. But is it the right call? You've got maybe 3 to 5 seconds to make a life or death call.
You've really only got two choices. You can land straight ahead, even if it's in bushes or a field, which is often the much safer bet. You keep control, and you land into the wind you took off in, which keeps your ground speed low. Or you can attempt to turn back. This is a crazy high-risk maneuver. It requires a steep turn that just bleeds altitude like a sieve, and even if you pull it off, you're now landing downwind at a terrifyingly high speed. Let's look at the math, because it's pretty shocking.
Okay, so the clock starts ticking the second the engine quits, and on average, it takes a pilot about 4 seconds just to process what happened. 4 seconds where you're not flying, you're just falling.
Then, to make a safe 180-degree turn to get lined back up with the runway, that takes about 75 seconds. In a glider with no power, 75 seconds is an absolute eternity, and you are losing altitude the entire time.
And here is the brutal result. You add up that reaction time and the time it takes to make the turn, and your plane will have lost over 1,000 feet of altitude. So, even if you started this whole thing 1,000 feet in the air, you'd hit the ground before you even finished the turn. That, right there, is why it's called the impossible turn.
So far, we've talked mostly about losing power. But what happens when the problem isn't the engine, but the plane's control systems themselves? What happens when the plane starts to fight back? A classic and scary example is a split flap failure. This is where one wing flap deploys, but the other one gets stuck. What this does is create a huge aerodynamic imbalance. The plane will try to roll hard toward the wing with the clean flap. The pilot has to physically wrestle the plane to keep it level, using opposite controls, pushing the yoke one way, a rudder pedal the other, all the way to the ground. It is an exhausting, intense emergency that requires a ton of strength and focus, especially since you have to land faster than normal just to maintain control. So after we've looked at the mental game, the physics of a crash, and these wild procedures, what's the one thing that really ties all of this together?
It brings us right back to where we started, with this simple idea. You can have all the training in the world, know every procedure by heart, but it's all useless if the pilot's head isn't in the right place. That ability to stay calm, to accept the reality of the situation, and to just execute the plan. That's what separates a story you tell at a bar from a tragedy.
Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In a situation with so many things you can't control, the weather, the terrain, what exactly broke on the plane, is survival just dumb luck? Or is it a matter of a disciplined mind using practice skills to essentially make its own luck? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.